Captain James Walker stood at the window of the Earth Defense Force Command Center, his eyes fixed on the night sky. The stars looked the same as they always had, but he knew something was different now. The deep space sensors had picked up the signals 3 days ago. Unknown vessels at the edge of the solar system, just beyond Pluto's orbit. The command center hummed with activity behind him. Dozens of officers and analysts worked at their stations, monitoring screens filled with data streams and sensor readings. Walker had been in command for 5 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Lieutenant Rogers called out from her communications station. "It's not from the unknown ships." "Different source, different encoding." Walker turned away from the window. "Put it through to my station." The message appeared on his screen, and his eyes widened as he read. The transmission was from a species calling themselves the Meridians. They had been watching Earth for years, and now they were breaking their silence with a warning. The ships approaching Earth belonged to the Galactic Empire, and they weren't here for peaceful contact. "Get me Dr. Reynolds from the Science Division," Walker ordered, his voice steady despite the weight of what he'd just read. As he waited for the call to connect, he continued reading the Meridian message. Each paragraph made his blood run colder. The Empire had a standard procedure for dealing with emerging civilizations they considered potential threats. They sent their most effective weapon, a massive vessel known throughout the galaxy as the Executioner. Its commander, Admiral Marcus, had a perfect record, 100% elimination of target species. Dr. Emma Reynolds arrived at the command center 20 minutes later, her lab coat wrinkled from a long day of work. Walker shared the message with her, watching as her scientific skepticism gave way to grim understanding. "The energy readings we detected," she said, looking at her tablet. "They match what the Meridians describe. The scout ships use the same shield technology as the Executioner, just on a smaller scale." Walker nodded. "Can we fight it?" "Not with our current weapons," Reynolds replied. "But—" She paused, her mind already racing with possibilities. "The data they sent about the shield frequencies. There might be something there. I need time." "Time is the one thing we don't have much of," Walker said, bringing up the tactical display. The scout ships were moving slowly, methodically, mapping Earth's defenses. Behind them, the Meridians warned, the Executioner was already on its way. Walker called an emergency meeting with Earth's military leadership. Within hours, representatives from every major nation were connected via secure channels. The room fell silent as Walker shared the Meridian warning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, looking at each face on the screens before him, "we have a choice to make. We can wait for this Executioner to arrive and try to negotiate, though the Meridians warn us that has never worked, or we can do what humanity does best: adapt, innovate, and surprise them." Dr. Reynolds stepped forward. "The Empire's technology is advanced, but it's not magic. They've grown overconfident. They follow the same patterns with every civilization they target. If we can understand their shields, we might find a weakness." The Chinese general spoke first. "You have the full support of our scientific community." "And ours," added the Russian president. One by one, every nation pledged their resources and expertise. As the meeting ended, Walker looked back at the night sky. Somewhere out there, humanity's greatest threat was approaching. But for the first time in history, Earth was truly united. They had one advantage the Empire wasn't counting on. They knew what was coming. The warning had given them a chance. Now they just had to make it count. Dr. Emma Reynolds hadn't slept in 36 hours. Empty coffee cups littered her lab desk, and the holographic displays around her showed endless streams of data from the Empire's scout ships. She rubbed her tired eyes, then looked back at the numbers that kept bothering her. "There's something we're missing," she muttered to herself, comparing the shield frequency readings. The patterns were there, but they didn't make sense. Until they did. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. "Captain Walker, you need to see this. Now." Walker arrived at the lab 15 minutes later, finding Reynolds practically bouncing with excitement. The usual calm scientist was replaced by someone who could barely contain herself. "Look at this," she said, pulling up two different datasets on the main screen. "Every time the scout ship shields deflect our scans, they create a quantum ripple. It's tiny, almost impossible to detect, but it's there, and it's always at the same frequency." Walker looked at the displays, trying to understand. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they're not as advanced as they think they are." Reynolds pulled up a third display. "Their shields work by creating a quantum field that deflects energy and matter. It's incredibly powerful, but they always use the same frequency. They've never needed to change it because no one has ever beaten it." She typed rapidly on her keyboard, and a simulation appeared. "But look what happens when we hit it with a precisely calibrated quantum pulse at the exact opposite frequency." The simulated shield flickered and collapsed. Walker's eyes widened. "You found their weakness." "Yes, but—" Reynolds' excitement dimmed slightly. "We don't have the technology to create a quantum pulse that's strong. Not yet. We'd need to build something that's never been built before." Walker straightened up. "How long?" "With just my team. Months, maybe years." Reynolds paused. "But with every physicist and engineer on Earth working together, you'll have them," Walker said immediately. He pulled out his tablet and started making calls. Within days, the lab was transformed. Scientists from around the world arrived, bringing their expertise and equipment. The Chinese brought quantum computers, the Russians contributed their advanced energy research, and the Americans provided their latest experimental power systems. Reynolds led them all, explaining her discovery and coordinating their efforts. They needed to build a device that could generate and focus an enormous amount of quantum energy, something that had only existed in theoretical papers before now. The work was challenging. The first prototype overloaded and melted. The second one couldn't generate a strong enough pulse. But with each failure, they learned more. "The problem isn't the pulse generation," said Dr. Lee from Seoul University, pointing at their latest test results. "It's the focusing. We can't keep the beam coherent at the power levels we need." Reynolds stared at the results, then suddenly smiled. "We're thinking too much like humans," she said. "Look at how the Empire's shields work. They don't use a single point of focus. They create a field of overlapping frequencies." She quickly sketched out a new design. Instead of one massive quantum pulse generator, they would build a network of smaller ones, working in perfect synchronization. "If we get the timing exactly right," she explained to Walker later that day, "the pulses will reinforce each other, like waves in a pond coming together to make a bigger wave." Walker looked at the new designs. "Can we build it in time?" Reynolds nodded. "The components are simpler now. We can manufacture them faster, and we don't need as much power for each one." She pulled up the latest Scout ship tracking data. "But we'll need a way to hide what we're building, if they realize what we're doing." "Leave that to me," Walker said, already forming a plan. "You've given us a chance, Dr. Reynolds. Now we just need to make sure we get to use it." As he left the lab, Reynolds turned back to her work. The Empire thought they were invincible because of their advanced technology, but they were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology. It was their ability to think differently and work together. Time was running out. The massive screens in the Earth Defense Force Command Center showed the Empire's scout ships moving closer each day. Behind them, long-range sensors had detected something much larger approaching: the Executioner. Captain Walker paced in the war room, surrounded by military leaders from around the world. "The quantum pulse network needs to be ready in 3 weeks," he said, pointing to the projected course of the Imperial fleet. "Not a day later." "My factories are working around the clock," said General Thompson of the American forces. "We've converted every semiconductor plant to building the pulse generators." "Same here," added General Wu from China. "But hiding this much activity isn't easy. The scout ships are watching everything." Walker nodded. They had developed a careful deception. Every time they built a quantum pulse generator, they disguised it as something else. Communications towers, weather stations, or solar power arrays. The whole world was playing a part in this massive trick. Meanwhile, in her lab, Dr. Reynolds was facing her own challenges. The test results from the latest prototype sat on her screen, and they weren't good enough. The quantum pulses were still losing coherence over long distances. "Try it again," she told her team, rubbing her temples. They had been working for 20 hours straight, but no one complained. They all knew what was at stake. The lab's test chamber hummed to life. Inside, 3 small quantum pulse generators fired in sequence. The target, a small shield generator based on the Empire's technology, flickered but didn't fail. "The timing is off by 2 microseconds," said Dr. Lee, studying the data. "The pulses aren't sensing properly." Reynolds walked to the whiteboard covered in equations. There had to be an answer. She thought about what they knew about the Empire's shields, about how they worked. Then something clicked. "We're still thinking in straight lines," she said suddenly. "Look at how their shield frequencies pulse. It's not a steady beat. It's more like a dance." She started drawing new timing diagrams. "We need to match their rhythm, then break it." The team quickly reprogrammed the test generators. This time, when they fired, the target shield collapsed completely. "That's it." Reynolds grabbed her phone to call Walker, but he was already calling her. "Dr. Reynolds," his voice was tense. "The executioner just passed Jupiter's orbit. We need the weapon ready now." "We just cracked it," she said. "But we'll need to reprogram every generator in the network with the new timing sequence." "How long?" Reynolds did quick calculations in her head. 5 days to update everything. "Maybe 4 if we work without breaks." "You have 3 days," Walker said. "That's all the time I can buy you." Around the world, technicians worked frantically to update the hidden quantum pulse generators. Military forces moved into position, setting up conventional defenses that would make the Empire think Earth was preparing for a traditional fight. In the command center, Walker met with Colonel Anderson, their chief strategist. "The latest intelligence from the Meridians confirms it," Anderson said. "The executioner always attacks from the same vector, coming in from above the planet's orbital plane where most defensive systems can't target effectively." "Then that's where we'll put our strongest generators," Walker replied. "Have we located all their scout ships?" "All but one," Anderson said grimly. "We lost track of it near Mars." Walker frowned. If that ship had spotted any of their preparations, he pushed the thought aside. They couldn't stop now. In her lab, Reynolds watched the update progress bars slowly fill on her screen. Each green light represented another generator ready for the real test. She hadn't slept in days, but adrenaline kept her going. A young technician brought her another coffee. "Dr. Reynolds," he said hesitantly, "do you think this will work?" Reynolds looked at the simulation running on another screen, showing their quantum pulses disrupting the Empire's shield pattern. "It has to," she said, "because if it doesn't, there won't be anyone left to try again." Outside, the night sky seemed peaceful. But up there, humanity's greatest threat was approaching, unaware that its prey had teeth and was ready to bite back. Colonel Thomas Anderson hadn't left the strategy room for 3 days. The walls were covered with holographic displays showing hundreds of battles, every recorded encounter between the Empire's executioner and its victims. Most people saw only failure in these records, but Anderson saw something else. "Look at this," he said as Captain Walker entered the room. Anderson waved his hand, and the displays shifted to show attack patterns. Every single time, the executioner attacks from above the planetary plane. Not most times, every time. Walker studied the patterns. Why would they be so predictable? "Because it's always worked," Anderson replied, pulling up more data. "Their shields are so strong, they've never needed to change tactics. The executioner positions itself where ground-based weapons have the hardest time targeting it, then uses its main weapon to crack the planet like an egg. A young analyst rushed into the room. "Sir, the missing scout ship. We found it." The main screen lit up with new data. The scout ship had been hiding behind Mars's largest moon, watching Earth's preparations. But instead of seeing the quantum pulse network, it had observed exactly what they wanted it to see: traditional defensive preparations that had failed against the executioner many times before. "They took the bait," Walker said, allowing himself a small smile. "They think they know exactly what we're planning." Anderson nodded. "And they'll follow their standard pattern because they think we're following ours." He pointed to a specific point in space. "They'll position the executioner right here, where they think our weapons can't reach them effectively. Right where our strongest quantum pulse generators will be waiting," Walker finished. The room's mood shifted as a new alert sounded. The executioner had passed Mars' orbit. Its massive form appeared on their long-range scans, a ship larger than anything humanity had ever built, shaped like a giant arrowhead pointing at Earth. Dr. Reynolds arrived, looking exhausted but determined. "The network is ready," she said. "All generators are programmed with the new timing sequence and hidden in place. As far as their scans can tell, they're just power stations and communication arrays." "What about the synchronization?" Walker asked. "We've solved it," Reynolds replied. "Each generator is linked to atomic clocks. When we give the signal, they'll fire in perfect harmony." She paused. "But we'll only get one shot. The Empire will realize what we're doing as soon as the first pulse hits their shields." Anderson brought up a new simulation. "Based on their past attacks, we'll have a window of about 30 seconds between when they settle into position and when they fire their main weapon. That's our chance." Walker gathered his officers. "Send word to all commands. Execute Phase 1 of the defense plan. Make it look good, but keep our forces just far enough back to be clear of the pulse network's range." Across Earth, military forces began moving into defensive positions. Ships launched from every spaceport, forming up in traditional combat formations. Ground-based weapon systems powered up, their energy signatures clearly visible to Imperial sensors. In orbit, the scout ships watched all this activity and transmitted their data back to the executioner. Admiral Marcus, the infamous commander of the Planet Killer vessel, received these reports with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as it had hundreds of times before. But in a hidden bunker deep beneath the Earth Defense Force headquarters, Colonel Anderson watched the Empire's forces moving into exactly the positions he had predicted. The executioner was following its standard approach vector, preparing to take up its favorite firing position. "They think they're the hunters," Anderson said quietly to Walker. "They don't realize they're walking into our trap." Dr. Reynolds checked the quantum network status one final time. All generators showed green. Hidden in plain sight, humanity's secret weapon waited for the perfect moment to strike. The executioner grew larger on their screens as it approached Earth. The moment of truth was almost here, and humanity's fate would be decided in the next few hours. The evacuation of Earth's major cities was almost complete. Millions of people moved underground into prepared shelters, while military forces took up their positions. On the surface, it looked like chaos, exactly what the Empire would expect from a frightened civilization facing extinction. Captain Walker stood in the command center, watching the massive holographic display showing the executioner's approach. The huge Imperial warship had slowed down, its escort of scout ships spreading out to surround Earth. "Status of the quantum pulse network?" he asked. Dr. Reynolds checked her readings. "All generators are powered up but running in stealth mode. As far as their scanners can tell, they're just regular power stations." She looked up at Walker. "The real power is building up in the underground capacitors. When we trigger the network, we'll have enough energy for one massive burst." Colonel Anderson entered the room, carrying new intelligence reports. "The scout ships are transmitting exactly the data we wanted them to see. They think our defenses are concentrated in the wrong places." A message flashed on the main screen. A transmission from the executioner. Walker nodded to Lieutenant Rogers at the communications station. Put it through. The screen filled with the image of Admiral Marcus. He was tall and imposing, his dark uniform decorated with symbols of past victories. His expression showed nothing but cold confidence. "People of Earth," Marcus said, his voice translated by their computers. "Your primitive sensors have no doubt detected our presence. The Galactic Empire has deemed your species a potential threat to galactic stability. You will be eliminated. Any resistance will only increase your suffering." Walker stepped forward. They had practiced this part carefully. "Please," he said, letting his voice shake slightly. "We're not a threat to anyone. We're barely able to reach our own moon." Marcus smiled coldly. "Your deception is noted. Our scouts have detected your weapon installations and fleet movements. Your species shows concerning signs of rapid military advancement. The Empire's judgment is final." The transmission cut off. Walker turned to his officers, dropping the fearful act. "Is everyone in position?" "All forces are at safe distance from the Pulse Network's range," Anderson confirmed. "The executioner is moving exactly as predicted. They're heading for their favorite firing position." Reynolds studied her displays. "The quantum generators are all charging perfectly. Power levels are at 60% and rising." She looked worried. "But if they scan too deeply before we're ready?" "They won't," Anderson said confidently. "Look at their pattern. They're following their standard protocol exactly. They're too confident to waste time on detailed scans of what they think are just power stations." On the main screen, they watched the executioner move into position. Its massive form blotted out the stars as it oriented itself above Earth's northern hemisphere. Scout ships formed a defensive screen around it, but they were focused outward, watching for conventional attacks. "Power levels at 90%, Reynolds reported. She wiped sweat from her forehead. "If this works, their shields will completely collapse. If it doesn't, it will work," Walker said firmly. He turned to Anderson. "Are our ships in position for the follow-up strike?" Anderson nodded. "Ready and waiting. The moment their shields drop, they'll hit the executioner with everything we've got." He paused. "Assuming the quantum pulse doesn't fry our own systems, the shielding on our ships will hold," Reynolds said, though her voice held a trace of uncertainty. They hadn't had time to fully test the protective measures they'd developed. The executioner had stopped moving. It hung in space like a massive sword pointed at Earth's heart. Their sensors detected energy building in its main weapon. "This is it," Walker said quietly. "All commands, prepare for Phase 2. Dr. Reynolds, begin final power-up sequence for the Pulse Network." Around the world, hidden quantum generators hummed as they reached full power. Humanity's fate rested on this one desperate gambit. In the next few minutes, they would either change the course of galactic history or become another extinct species in the Empire's long list of victories. The executioner's main weapon was powering up. The massive ship's energy readings were climbing higher and higher as it prepared to deliver its planet-killing strike. In Earth's command center, every screen showed countdown timers, both for the enemy's weapon and for humanity's response. "Quantum network at full power," Dr. Reynolds announced, her voice tense. "All generators synchronized. Ready on your command." Captain Walker looked at Colonel Anderson, who nodded. Everything was in position. Their ships waited in the shadow of the moon, hidden from the Empire's sensors. The quantum pulse generators, disguised as power stations, were ready to fire. Enemy weapon charging at 70%, Lieutenant Rogers reported from her station. Estimated time to firing, 45 seconds. Walker took a deep breath. "Send the evacuation completion signal. Make sure they see it." A series of transmissions went out from Earth's major cities, meant to be intercepted by the Imperial forces. They showed panicked officials reporting that the underground shelters weren't ready, that people were still on the surface. On the main screen, Admiral Marcus's face appeared again. "Your pitiful attempts at evacuation are noted," he said coldly. "It will not save you. The Empire's judgment will be. Now, Walker shouted. Dr. Reynolds slammed her hand down on the activation control. Around the world, the hidden quantum generators burst into life. What had looked like simple power stations suddenly blazed with energy, each one precisely timed to create a perfect wave of quantum disruption. The pulse hit the executioner's shields like a hammer striking glass. For a moment, the massive ship's defensive field glowed brilliantly, then shattered completely. "Shields down," Anderson shouted. "All ships, execute attack pattern Delta." From behind the moon, Earth's combined fleet appeared. Every surviving warship humanity possessed charged forward, weapons blazing. The executioner's scout ships tried to respond, but they were caught out of position, still facing the wrong way. Inside the command center, they watched as their first missiles struck the executioner's now vulnerable hull. Explosions bloomed across its surface. "Direct hits," Anderson reported. "Their point defense systems are offline. The pulse affected their secondary systems too." But the executioner wasn't defeated yet. Its main weapon was still charging, now at 90% power. If it fired, even without shields, it could still destroy Earth. "Second wave, launch now," Walker commanded. A new set of ships appeared from Earth's atmosphere, small fast fighters that had been hiding among the civilian evacuation ships. They streaked toward the executioner, targeting its main weapon ports. On their screens, they could see Admiral Marcus shouting orders, his former confidence replaced by rage and disbelief. The mighty executioner, pride of the Imperial fleet, was being swarmed by the very primitive ships it had dismissed as no threat. "Main weapon power climbing," Rogers warned. 95%. Reynolds was frantically working at her station. "The quantum disruption is affecting their power systems. If they try to fire now..." She didn't get to finish. The executioner's main weapon tried to fire, but with its shields down and its power systems disrupted, the massive energy pulse backfired. A blinding explosion erupted from the ship's bow, tearing through its internal structures. "All ships, clear the blast radius," Walker ordered. They watched as the executioner began to break apart, secondary explosions chaining through its massive hull. The scout ships, seeing their invincible flagship destroyed, began to retreat in panic. "We did it," Reynolds whispered, then louder. "We actually did it." The command center erupted in cheers. On screens around the world, people emerged from their shelters to celebrate. Humanity had faced extinction and survived. More than that, they had dealt the Empire its first major defeat. But Walker and Anderson exchanged knowing looks. This wasn't over. They had just changed the galaxy forever, and the Empire wouldn't forget that. Earth would need to prepare for what came next. 3 months after the destruction of the executioner, Earth was a different place. The wreckage of the massive Imperial warship had been carefully collected and brought down to special research facilities. Teams of scientists from every nation worked together, studying the advanced technology that had once threatened to destroy them. Captain Walker stood in Dr. Reynolds' new laboratory, watching as researchers examined pieces of the executioner's shield generators. The room was filled with a mix of Imperial and human technology, creating a strange blend of the familiar and the alien. "Look at this," Reynolds said, pointing to a holographic display. "Their quantum shield technology is amazing, but it's just the beginning. The Empire has been holding back so much knowledge from younger species." She smiled. "Knowledge that we now have access to." Walker nodded. "How long until we can build our own ships with this technology?" "Months, not years," Reynolds replied. "The quantum pulse network proved we already understand the basic principles. Now we just need to adapt their technology to our needs." She paused. "And improve it." The Empire got lazy. They stopped innovating because they thought they were unbeatable. Colonel Anderson entered the lab, carrying new reports from their deep space monitoring stations. "The Empire's pulling back from this entire sector of space," he said. "Our victory scared them more than we thought. They've never lost a ship like the Executioner before." "And the Meridians?" Walker asked. "They've made contact again," Anderson replied. "They're sending diplomats. Apparently, our victory has inspired other species to stand up to the Empire. We're not the only ones who were tired of being bullied." Through the lab's window, they could see the new defense platforms being constructed in orbit. They looked like Earth technology on the outside, but inside they contained hybrid systems, human innovation combined with Imperial technology. A junior officer rushed into the lab. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Imperial capital." They hurried to the command center, where Lieutenant Rogers was already working to put the message on screen. The Imperial Senate appeared, not just one admiral this time, but the full governing body of the Empire. The Senate Speaker, an aged alien with ornate robes, spoke first. "People of Earth, we are reassessing our previous judgment of your species." Walker stepped forward. "Are you now?" he asked calmly. "And what has led to this reassessment?" "Your victory over the executioner was impressive," the speaker admitted. "We underestimated your capabilities and your resourcefulness. The Empire proposes a ceasefire, followed by diplomatic negotiations." Walker looked at Anderson and Reynolds, who both nodded slightly. They had planned for this. "We accept the ceasefire," Walker said. "But understand this, Earth will not be joining your empire as a subject world. We've proven we can defend ourselves. Any future relationship will be as equals." The Imperial senators muttered among themselves, but the speaker nodded. "Agreed. We will send representatives to begin discussions." After the transmission ended, Walker turned to his team. "They're scared," Anderson said with a slight smile. "They know that if we figure out how to beat their best ship, other species might do the same." "Good," Reynolds added. "Fear might make them listen." And while they're talking, she gestured to her lab, where work continued on the Imperial technology. Walker looked out at the stars through the command center's window. Just a few months ago, those stars had seemed full of terror, humanity's last stand against an unstoppable enemy. Now they represented opportunity, a future where humans would venture out as equals among the galactic civilizations. "Send word to the world leaders," he said. "Tell them it's time to begin Phase 2, the Earth Space Defense Force." He smiled. The Empire thought they were coming to eliminate a primitive species. Instead, they created a new power in the galaxy. Above them, the stars twinkled with promise. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger. They had proven that determination, unity, and clever thinking could overcome even the most advanced technology. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity was ready for whatever the galaxy might throw at them next.